You can summarize the types of taxes into two groups. The taxes that are implemented primarily to raise money for government services, and the taxes that are used as a means to influence the choices of the population. For example, the taxes on incomes are not meant to stop people from working. It is simply meant to raise money for roads, police, military, and so on. On the other hand, the taxes on gasoline, alcohol, or tobacco are meant to influence the buying habits of the population, or at least they are described as they are meant to increase the prices of the products and therefore decrease the use of those products. Because most people agree that we should use less fossil fuels, we should drink less alcohol, we should use less tobacco and be healthier, these taxes, at least in European countries and cultures, are more popular, or at least met with less resistance. However, where I think the problems have risen, for example if you look at countries such as France, where in the last few years massive protests have taken place, with one of the most important problems being the high taxes on gasolines. The argument presented by some of these people are not that we should drive more environmentally harmful cars. The argument lies with the fact that few solutions or alternatives for people to drive anything else than gas-powered cars is unavailable for poor or even middle-class citizens. Usually, these protests consist of people living in rural areas where this is understandable. For people living in cities, this tax works as intended. The tax punishes people for driving their car and encourages people to take the bike or public transportation. But in the areas where neither bicycles or public transport is a viable option, this tax takes another form. The only result of this tax is that it punishes people for driving their car. But since they have no alternatives, they are going to keep driving their car, meaning the only difference is that they are getting poorer and poorer with each increase of the tax. It gives them no alternative. The risk is that with this tax increased, and the government almost hoping that the use of gasoline does not go down, since this would mean more money raised to the government without the need to raise the income tax, which has the potential to cost a lot more votes. Another example of these taxes that could be called more popular, or let's say not so bad, or let's say don't make you look like the bad guy, is the tax on alcohol. Now, just a quick explanation. Sweden have different taxes on beer, wine, spirits, and the tax is not exactly taken from how much alcohol content is in the beverage. It is laid out in the tax system so that beer has one kind of tax per liter pure alcohol, wine has another, and so on. I have chosen beer as an example. When I started to look into this and laid out the tax on beer on a graph with the consumption of alcohol, I found what I expected. The taxes works in reducing the consumption, but is still unpopular, just like the taxes on gas. But I luckily then realized that these taxes was not tied to inflation, since the tax on alcohol is not bound to the prices, but is instead a flat number that is raised from time to time. This means that the numbers need to be adjusted according to the inflation. And when I adjusted the tax to the inflation, we can see something different. The alcohol consumption has gone down, and marginally, so has even the tax. And with the graph now adjusted, it is harder to see a clear correlation between the two, and I'm not really sure what kind of conclusions can be drawn. However, the alcohol tax raises just short of 18 billion crowns. That is about 1.6 billion US dollars. To put that in comparison, we can say that it raises a bit more than the tax on gasoline, or is just short of doubling the tax on imported goods, as a frame of reference for people living in other countries. This is meant to show just how much money these kinds of more popular, let's say, taxes raises the government, and how not becoming dependent on them and raising the taxes on these kinds of products are an easy and quick fix to raise money for the state instead of actually raising the income tax or other taxes, which at least historically has been meant to fund these projects. But what is really the problem of using these kinds of taxes to fund the projects and using the tax this way? After all, isn't this a better way to raise taxes for government projects than an income tax? The tax works in positive ways both when it's collected and when it's being spent. The Swedish word for these taxes can be, if directly translated, to point taxes. And just like it is called a point tax, the people financing these taxes is a little point or circle in the population. What I mean by this is that for the common person, these taxes affect little, since they are able to make choices, for example, use the bike more. But for the people who really can't make that choice, or feel like they can't make that choice, an anger begins to lurk. Why am I paying this much in tax just because I live 10 miles from the city, when the city dweller, who is rich and can afford to live in the city, enjoy the funding of my taxes with the new libraries, public transport, schools and hospitals? All the while, the state tells me they can't afford to keep the only clinic for 124 miles. This is dangerous. Not only unfair, but it's dangerous. It creates a split between people and creates problems for the democracy. This is the reason we see the yellow vests, and this is the reason that we see the protests and changes in politics. Not because less people believe in climate change, or other reasons. These changes are because we have started to treat one group of people very differently and unfairly. And I am sure that both you and I would feel the resentment that start to rise if we time and time again got a huge tax raise to finance lower taxes for richer persons, while simultaneously the state cuts down on our social services. What kinds of solutions can we find to this problem then? The taxes levied with the goal of changing people's buying habits should not be abused as a way to raise taxes without losing votes. Each dollar raised from the tax on gasoline should be earmarked and be put to work with the same goal as the tax had in the first place. If we combine the tax for gasoline and other petrol products, we get the government income of 41,425,000,000 crowns. This is enough to give away 69,561 Volvo EX30 electric cars every year, meaning that every family with children in Sweden will have an electric car in 12 years, counting the 1.2 million families with children under 18. Of course, what my point is with this is not that a tax should fund shoving down electrical vehicles down the throat of every man, woman and child in the country, but instead that a tax should go to the carrot in the green transition that everyone can take part in. This changes to carbon taxes or other consumer taxes would perhaps make the tax not look like a tax for people in rural areas to finance the super green, super high-tech buses for the rich city people, but that it would be a tax that would be accepted and recognized in the same way that other taxes are looked upon, as a way to direct resources from those with the ability to do more to those with the need, all for the cause of a common greater goal that we all share and can all agree is one that is needed. A tax meant to create the same unity and obviousness as we see the police, military or fire department, all who help everyone equally in a time of crisis. That these taxes should not be seen as a divider between rural or suburban or other ways, but as a unifier that we are all working and working together, each individual doing and giving what they can to reach our goal that I am sure everyone can agree on.